Hi, everybody. Welcome to Devil's Advocate. John Caldera has the night off. I'm Todd Shepherd, the investigative reporter for the Independence Institute, and we are certainly glad you are with us tonight. Now, before I introduce the two guests that I have with me here, let me ask you a question first off. What do you think is the most important part of government as it relates to you in your daily life? Is it the school system and the way that your local school board operates and the curriculum they decide on? Maybe you're more interested, or you think the most important part of government are cops or the sheriff's office in your particular county. Let's say maybe you're more interested in taxes, how those are administered, how they're collected. Maybe you think the most important part of government are courts or even the local parks nearby you. But what do all of those things have in common? The one thing I think that all of those things have in common, and what we're going to talk about tonight, is understanding those portions of government by using open records. And open records really is a tool that came to the forefront in United States life really in the Watergate era. Prior to that, you might be able to ask a government for a record, and you might get it, you might not. But now we actually have laws, and those laws provide journalists with the access to get these records to let you know more about how government is behaving in your neck of the woods, whether it's at the state level or at the, like I said, the county level or at the school board level. So let me start off now and introduce the two guests that we have. I'm happy to have them here with us tonight. We were just talking before this camera started rolling, we represent two of the three most lowest rated professions in America: journalists, lawyers, and Congress. Congress isn't represented at the table tonight, but we do start off with the journalist, Nicole Vapp. Nicole, you are the executive producer of 9 Wants to Know. Happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much, Todd.
Tell me a little bit, you're also, in addition to being the executive producer of 9 Wants to Know, you work with investigative reporters and editors. Tell me a little bit about what IRE is and what you all do.
IRE is an organization that was started after the death of a reporter in Arizona, murdered while working on a story, which you think about happening in a third world country. This time it happened in Phoenix, Arizona. He was covering a mob case. And so his friends started an organization that is primarily to educate other journalists about investigative reporting and helping them do their jobs better. And that's really what I do as a producer, and that's what IRE does as an organization. And you were just recently elected to the board of directors of IRE,
yep. Right? Really quickly, for those of you who are interested in IRE, you can learn more at IRE.org. They have a lot of online resources that even citizens can take advantage of, so I urge you to take advantage of that website. Now, happy to introduce Steve Zansberg. Tell us about what you do with the Freedom of Information Coalition, Steve.
Well, thanks for having me here.
You bet.
Yes, I'm the president of the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, which is an organization of organizations, including the Independence Institute, the ACLU, the Ethics Watch, Colorado Broadcasters Association, and the Press Association, as well as individual citizens. And it's committed to increasing government transparency in the state of Colorado through education and providing materials and assistance to help empower citizens, not just journalists, to exercise their statutory rights to hold government officials accountable under our Open Records Act and our Open Meetings Law.
So let's talk about that last thing that you mentioned there in particular. I mean, you represent these organizations, and the Independence Institute has just become affiliated with the Freedom of Information Coalition in the last year. We're really excited about some of the things we anticipate being able to do together in terms of open records and access to government. But what can a citizen say out in Grand Junction or up in Steamboat or out in Lincoln County be able to get if they were a member of or if they contacted the Freedom of Information Coalition? How can you help?
Well, you've touted IRE.org. I'd like to tout ColoradoFOIC.org, which is our coalition's website. Our executive director, Jeff Roberts, has done just an incredible job providing a wealth of resources for citizens. Access to the actual records law and open meetings law themselves, a handy guide to using those laws, a template letter for submitting records requests to government officials in any jurisdiction, town, city, county, state government. It applies, our Open Records Act applies to every level of government. And it basically begins with a proposition that the records that government holds, makes, maintains, or keeps that discuss the conduct of public business are the public's records. they're ours. They're not just the press's. The press does access them regularly and performs an invaluable function in reporting on government operations through access to those records. But every citizen has exactly the same right as Nicole and the reporters at 9 News to access records and to access meetings. There's no special prerogative for the press. And our website, which I encourage viewers to go to, has a wealth of resources and materials to help citizens exercise those rights.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things about open records is I do get the sense a lot of times when I talk about it, the public feels that the Open Records Act is a tool for journalists. And Nicole, I'm sure you agree with me. I always view the job of being a journalist as just being a full-time citizen where we get to ask the things that the citizen would ask if they didn't have a day job, right? So really the Freedom of, or not the Freedom of Information Coalition, but the Open Records Act is a tool for citizens of which journalists are just a normal subset. Let's get into some more specifics. Trends in open records, and let's for now leave out the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level and just talk state-based, the Colorado Open Records Act. Last 5 years, trends in open records that you see. Nicole, let's start with you. Would you say we're getting more access, or that trends in the Colorado Open Records Act, that the trends are favoring citizens, or is it swaying back towards government?
You know, I think one of my biggest things that I've noticed in the last 5 years is really the cost. And so when you talk about open records being open to the public, we often get a response back that says, well, if you pay this much, and I know you found the same thing, if you pay this much, you can have access to this, and it shouldn't be you have to pay to play. You know, if you're talking about someone like my grandmother who just wants to know what's going on in her city council, should somebody on a fixed income be forced to pay for information that they've already paid through taxes? That's my argument.
Steve, last 5 years, the pendulum as it swings, are you seeing more access or easier access? Let's say, as Nicole used the example, her grandmother, for just an ordinary citizen, someone that's not a full-time journalist like she works or I work.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a, more or less. In some respects, there's been far more. Government is taking seriously its responsibility to provide information affirmatively without anyone requesting it. More and more information through an organization called Open Colorado is being posted, database sets from the city and county of Denver and across the state. And that is really quite beneficial, something that didn't exist obviously prior to the internet, and which is more than 5 years old now. But I think the trend of posting more and more information, agendas, meeting packets, and things of that sort has really increased, and that's obviously very positive. Among other things, you don't have to request access, you don't have to pay for it, and open to one, open to all. And that's certainly happening in the court system, where high-profile cases like the Aurora Theater shooting case, the docket, not every document, but most of the documents are available to the public across the nation. You don't only have to be resident here in Colorado or across the world on the internet. So that's a positive. The negative, I would say, is that there is an increasing the costs that Nicole mentioned are increasingly being interposed as a way for the government to recoup its costs of spending staff time away from doing the work of government, when in fact providing access to public records is the work of government. Right. But there are these exorbitant fees that was improved somewhat this last legislative session through the coalition's work to impose a cap statewide in research and retrieval fees. But cost is a problem that has gotten worse and continues to get worse. Another problem that makes matters worse is it's somewhat ironic that there's more and more information being generated every day in the private sector and in the public sector because it's so easy and less paper is being used and more of it is digital. And yet at the same time, accessing that information has become more difficult in many respects because of costs and retrieval, records retention, intermingling of public and private information in the same files or same messages. And so there are hurdles of that sort. And the last one is there's an increasing sense among a lot of governments in our state that the information about public employees is less entitled to privacy interests, though they frequently assert that as well. But the government has a lot of information about private citizens, including Social Security numbers and lots of
we would
stuff.
assume they have most of, at least what goes in on the tax form, yeah.
Right, and so they feel the need to protect the privacy interests of third parties, not governmental operations, but ordinary citizens are swept up in governmental operations all the time, and so we're seeing an increasing invocation of privacy as an overarching basis for withholding records.
And I think what's also interesting about the volume of records that you're talking about that are, in many cases, as you're talking, being freely put online, the problem that actually gets to now for journalists, Nicole and the other great investigative reporters at other TV stations, is it used to be things were being hidden, and now they're hidden in plain sight, where if we just put enough out there, the most interesting part or the most scandalous part maybe is right there, but the question is will you go through the entire haystack of information that's been provided to actually find that needle? You bring up costs without divulging any trade secrets. Does 9 News sort of have a budget? I mean, if you know, okay, we're going to request this and it's going to cost a couple $100, or do you guys just have enough muscle because you're Channel 9 that you can say, we're not paying that, but you're going to fork it over?
Oh, I wish that were the case.
Okay.
I think everyone does, but we do it on a story by story basis. I mean, if you. And you can talk to a government, and so you start with a really wide request, and you can start working with them. What if we pay for this, and what if we pay for that? So you may not be getting the whole haystack, as you were saying, but maybe you can narrow it down to enough where you just have a little pile. And so you go through that, and if there's more, and you think there's more, then you can make the argument that you need a little bit more money to get a little bit more. You know, if you start smaller and work up, you may find the bigger story in the haystack. And sometimes when you do that story on that little part, someone will come out. I mean, there's still great whistleblowers in everywhere, right? And if you do something on a smaller basis, you may get someone saying, you didn't look in the right place, go here. And that's what we rely on. We rely on those people to call us. Happens on every story that we do. No one knows who talks to us, but those are the people that really make the open records work, because they're the ones who really know where to find stuff. And in the future, I can see, especially if the costs keep going up, those are the people that are really going to make sure that we're able to continue doing our jobs, watchdogs.
Steve, I think she brings up an incredibly interesting point that's not necessarily written out in the Open Records Act, but she talks about whistleblowers. And it's been my experience that a lot of state agencies now, a lot of local agencies, they have employee manuals or they have employee guidelines that say if you're an employee of this governmental agency, you can't talk to the press. Everything has to go through our press agents or our press information officer. In your opinion, are there enough, is Colorado law strong enough, or has it caught up to the modern whistleblower, so that if I'm in a government and I actually reveal my identity and I say this agency was corrupt or they made this decision wrong, are there enough protections for them to keep their job, for them to keep their paycheck and the benefits that they rely on, but they still, want to do the right thing and say this was wrong when government did this?
Well, public employees are also citizens, and so they have First Amendment rights outside of the workplace to blow the whistle, to expose government wrongdoing. They certainly can't be sanctioned and lose their job in retaliation for their doing the right thing. But the government is also an employer, and it can say that official press statements on behalf of our agency are to be made by our public information officer, and no one else can come onto this program and formally represent the city and county of Denver. We have a designated individual to do that. So there are limits on what public employees can say in the scope of their employment. But outside of that, they have protections under our First Amendment to speak out about matters of public concern that are not within their job duties or restrictions.
As I mentioned in the Open Records Act, Colorado's Open Records Act came about, like most Open Records Act legislation across the nation. It came about in the Watergate era, excuse me. But of course, so we're talking about laws that were written in the 70s, and now we've got technologies that are emerging so fast. Can the open records law keep up? Nicole, do you run into this very often with the investigations your team does at 9 News, where let's say these new technologies like cops have license plate readers? Do you run into these areas where you're asking for information, and because the law was written so long ago, they actually use that as a way to keep you away from the information?
Oh, all the time. And I think, a good example is, when you ask for a database that has all the information that you're looking for, and they'll quote you, this is going to take us 6 hours. And I know, that if you do this long enough, there's no way, unless they have a hamster behind in the computer trying to get this information out of the computer, that it's going to take that long. But you kind of hide behind the mysticism of the IT guy says this, so you're going to have to pay for this much time and money, and so I think there's a lot of that still happens. And then talking about the cameras that are everywhere, the Halo cameras, do we have access to those? Can we get those on a daily basis? And just the laws are not as fast as technology. And we just got iOS 8 today.
Right.
Is that there's probably a number of things that you can get off of government phones just from that one added, that it will take years for us to sort out and figure out. Right.
That reminds me of an investigation I think a paper in Tampa Bay did, where they actually accessed some GPS data from state troopers' cars, and by matching point A with point B, they were able to calculate that nearly half of the state patrol was going 90 miles an hour on their way home from work, right? So not traveling to any emergency, but that's that sort of latent data, right? That they may not have necessarily created the data, but the device itself was keeping and recording that data. And so would that be something, I can certainly see a government saying, oh, well, we didn't actually create the document. And so we get into this nebulous area there.
I thought you were going to say they found them parked at Dunkin' Donuts.
Well, no, they would calculate. They said, well, gosh, you were at work at 5:30 when you clocked out. You ended up at home at 5:50, and you're 45 miles away from the office. So how did you get there so quickly? Steve, you and I have talked. I personally have had a difficulty with a state agency, and I won't get into who, but I found out this year that essentially a state worker that now has Google for Government, that's something I was a big proponent of, because I thought with Google's vast reserves of server space, I thought, well, if we now have Google for Government, emails will never be deleted. And I was so excited for this new era of government transparency where no email will be deleted. Steve, much to my chagrin, I found out that not only can they be deleted, if they are deleted, that means the government worker can essentially get this off of their hard drive, and they can get it out of Google the same day. I know you've actually talked to a group of investigative reporters about this. What's the new front in terms of data retention, specifically computer data retention? What's going on with that?
Right. Well, so to echo what I said earlier, that we have now much more information than ever before. But one of the significant barriers to accessing that information is it being kept? In the old days, letters were being sent to and from government agencies, and they were put in filing cabinets, and then they were shipped off to cold storage, and you could go retrieve it from cold storage. And at
$25 an hour, of course.
Right. There were fees then too, but now instead of putting them in a box and in a filing cabinet and shipping them off, they're going into the shredder. Upon arrival, or upon being read. Read and delete is the operative policy of our General Assembly staff. And there are records retention schedules. There is, independent of the Open Records Act, which does not impose on itself any duty to either make a record or to keep a record.
Right.
It just says if a record is made, if a record is kept and maintained by a government agency, it's available for inspection, so long as it exists. But it doesn't say anything about how long it has to exist. We had this unfortunate ruling from a judge up in Larimer County saying a school district was within its rights to order the mass destruction of tens of thousands of emails relating to one family within that school district. That didn't violate the Open Records Act. Our position in that case was that by destroying those records, the school district was making them unavailable for inspection. The duty to retain records is a separate statute in the same volume of our statute books, and it imposes upon our state archivist to set forth schedules for records retention by agency, by municipalities that are not binding. They are chosen to be adopted by cities and towns and school districts and sheriff's offices. There are a whole range of and for state agencies as well. Actually, they are required to be adopted by state agencies. And they largely put discretion in the hands of just frontline employees to decide what is a record that has significant value in reflecting the conduct of government such that it should be retained, and then it's subject to a schedule, as opposed to the transitory, just day-to-day chatter that doesn't need to be kept.
Right. And I'm sure anything that would embarrass government greatly, that's probably the balancing test. If it's embarrassing, it is not a record that should be kept or archived.
Well, it's very difficult to enforce these laws because unless you have a whistleblower or a source, a favorite technique of the news media is to have, whether electronic or otherwise, to have a record that has been leaked to them, and then to call and or try to access that record through the Open Records Act and be told it doesn't exist, there never was such a record, et cetera. That's the great gotcha moment that investigative journalists do. And in the Poudre School District case, the record that was not produced and was held to not exist until it was discovered in the course of discovery in that case was the directive to order the delete, to not only delete the records, but then expunge them to make sure they would never be retained. And that communication itself, which said, please delete this upon finishing it, upon telling everyone to fulfill this destruction order. I don't want any record made of this very communication for the reason that I want to avoid discovery under CORA.
Right.
That record was deleted.
And for those of you watching at home, I really urge you, if you're interested in what Steve's talking about, this was a story broken by Channel 7, the Poudre School District, and again, the willful destruction of documents, the coordinated destruction of documents. Just Google Poudre School District deleting emails. I'm sure you'll find it in probably one of the top results, but it really, in my mind, was one of the biggest open records cases in Colorado in the last couple of years. We'll get back to that in just a second. Nicole, I want to ask you really quickly, you are working with a lot of other media groups, not just TV stations, on it, and it may, again, not necessarily be directly relatable to the CORA law, but you're working to try to get camera access to the James Holmes Aurora theater shooting trial. Tell us about what you're going through there and what some of the obstacles you're facing and how you're trying to overcome those.
Well, both sides of this case have asked to not have cameras in the courtroom. And the way I look at it, if it's a public forum, which is what trials are, you have it in a public forum so someone gets a fair trial, then we should be able to have access to that. And I think an argument that always comes up is the O.J. Simpson media circus behind that trial, and it was very sensational, and we want decorum in our courtroom, and we don't want to have that kind of staging and all of that. But I think all of that goes on in a closed area, and we have so many people that are interested in this. This affected so many people in our community. Our community should be able to see what happens in this case, should be able to watch the different issues that come up throughout this, because so many people were injured or knew someone was injured. There's no way for all the people who are interested in this case to be able to go to that court and watch the proceedings. And the only other way is for us to act as that extra person in the courtroom to show them what's going on.
Right, and I think The Aurora Sentinel wrote an op-ed on this, and quite frankly, my politics in this, I rarely agree with the Aurora Sentinel in their editorial stances, but in this case, they argued that it goes well beyond Colorado in letting the whole nation see not just the way the case unfolds, but as we were talking before we started rolling tape tonight, Steve, you were saying it's going to be important just to watch the reaction of James Holmes in the theater for people to even sort of get their own sense as to whether the sanity, and I know we're not psychologists, we would never come to a total conclusion based on this, but just watching the guy in the courtroom will help. And you're a part of this legal effort to get the cameras in the courtroom as well.
Yes, by the time this show airs, I will have appeared on behalf of the print media on Monday this coming Monday, to argue in favor of camera access to that trial. And, you know, one of the principal reasons why we allow cameras into the courtroom is so that the public can witness firsthand the proceedings. The press does a wonderful job, and there are sketch artists, and they'll be tweeting and blogging, and they'll be fairly instantaneous and undoubtedly and legitimately so extensive coverage of this months-long trial.
Right.
12 dead, 70 injured, and you know the human toll is catastrophic. It's the worst mass shooting in Colorado certainly since Columbine. Hopefully, ever again.
Ever again.
But you know, the issues that are being raised and addressed in that trial about whether the not guilty by reason of insanity defense that is being asserted, and whether, if there is a conviction, the death penalty should be imposed, are front and center in this state and, frankly, the United States. And to be relegated to secondhand reports, as wonderful as they are, both print and electronic, is a disservice to the public. You know, we have a spillover courtroom because there's so much demand, and not everyone can afford to travel and spend the time traveling from all over the country to wait in line and get through security and make it into that courtroom. And so that's why we would need cameras, so that the public can see how the prosecutor, the defendant, and all of the participants actually behave.
And that's really helps us do our jobs better, because if people are able to watch...
Got to stop you, Nicole.
Okay.
We're down to our last 10 seconds.
Yes, sir.
It's been Nicole Vatt from 9 News, Steve Zansberg, president of the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition. Hope you've enjoyed the discussion tonight. We'll see you next time on Devil's Advocate.